You just bought a game for full price straight off the shelf. You just want to sit down after a long day at work and play the game by yourself, but it won't load. It's not because your internet's down, it's actually Ubisoft servers that are down. A single player game, one you paid $60, $70 for, quietly refused to start. That actually happened. Launch weekend, July 2026, to thousands of people who bought Assassin's Creed Black Flag resynced. And in between those two moments, the company lost almost all of its value, got dragged through a criminal trial, and somehow is still run by the same guy. So today we're asking one question. How does a company keep making the same mistake for 16 years and still not go bankrupt? And more importantly, is this actually incompetence? Or is it a strategy that just happens to screw the customer every single time? Ubisoft stock hit an all-time high in the summer of 2018, just under €108 a share. By 2025, that same share was trading for around €2, while the games industry around it, Nintendo, Capcom, kept climbing. Then this year it got worse. In January 2026, the stock dropped over 30% in a single trading day after restructuring announcements. By May, when Ubisoft closed out its full financial year, they reported a net loss of roughly €1.5 billion, the worst annual result in the company's 40-year history. Revenue down almost 22%, 6 games cancelled, 7 more delayed, and they still went out and told investors in writing that the next year would be worse before it gets better. This is a company that makes Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, Rainbow Six, names that, on paper, should be worth billions in goodwill alone. So how do you burn through that? Ubisoft wasn't born a soulless megacorp. 5 brothers, the Guillemots, started it out of a French farming town in the 80s with seed money from their mother. This is a company that gave the industry Rayman, that turned Tom Clancy's novels into some of the best stealth and shooter games ever made, that helped define what an open world game even looks like. For a solid 2 decades, that family-run identity was the whole appeal. They were independent, creative, and stubborn about staying that way. Then, in 2015, a much bigger French media company called Vivendi started quietly buying up Ubisoft stock. By the end of 2016, they owned over 25% of the company. Under French law, that's dangerously close to forcing a full buyout. The Guillemots spent 3 years calling in every favor they had to dilute Vivendi out and keep control. They won that fight, but winning it wasn't free. To fend off one outside investor, they let in another. Tencent, the Chinese gaming giant, took its first stake in 2018. And once you've let one shareholder that big into the house, you don't really get to invite them. A company that fought hard to stay independent ended up more financially entangled than ever. And to pay for that fight, they needed revenue. Fast, recurring, reliable revenue. Which brings us to this. Back in 2010, Ubisoft shipped Assassin's Creed 2 and Silent Hunter 5 with a new kind of copy protection. To play either game, even alone, offline, no multiplayer involved, you needed a constant live connection to Ubisoft servers. Ubisoft servers, at the time, were not reliable. They went down regularly, and when they did, every legitimate customer got locked out of a game they'd already paid for, while people who'd pirated it played just fine with no server check required. The backlash was loud enough that Ubisoft actually dropped the policy in 2012. You'd think that's a lesson learned. It wasn't. Fast forward to 2024, Ubisoft shut down the servers for the crew permanently, and the game, again, something people had paid full price for, became completely unplayable overnight. In 2025, a European privacy group filed a complaint after a player requested his own data from Ubisoft. He had bought Far Cry Primal, a fully offline, single-player game, and found that in just 10 minutes of play, the game had pinged outside servers, including Google, Amazon, and a company called Datadog, around 150 times. For a single-player game, with no multiplayer component at all. Ubisoft's official line is that this is an ownership verification check. Maybe. But Ubisoft also happens to run i3d.net, a server infrastructure company they quietly acquired back in 2018, which now handles traffic for millions of players across the gaming industry, not just Ubisoft's own titles. When a company's track record includes locking players out of games they own, refusing an internet connection isn't really an option anymore either. You play by Ubisoft's rules, or you don't play the game you bought. In 2020, French newspaper Libération published an investigation into Ubisoft's internal culture. What came out was years of alleged sexual harassment, psychological abuse, and a pattern of HR complaints that had allegedly been buried rather than acted on. Several senior executives resigned within days, including the company's longtime chief creator officer, Serge Hascoët, a man who'd shaped the DNA of nearly every major Ubisoft franchise for over a decade. It took 5 more years for any legal consequence to land. In July 2025, a French court finally convicted 3 former Ubisoft executives. Thomas Francois, a former editorial vice president, got a suspended 3-year sentence and was also convicted of attempted sexual assault. The court heard testimony that included forcing the employee to do a headstand in a skirt. Then, this July of 2026, the same month Black Flag Resynced launched to strong reviews and strong sales, Ubisoft laid off 51 developers at its Barcelona studio. Some of them had worked on the game for over 2 years. You can draw a straight line through all 3 of these stories. Servers that fail the customer, data practices nobody fully explains, employees treated as disposable the moment a project ships. Which gets us to the real end game, because Ubisoft isn't just bleeding money, it's being taken apart, piece by piece, in plain sight. Last November, Ubisoft finished spinning off its 3 biggest franchises, Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Rainbow Six, into a new subsidiary called Vantage Studios. Tencent bought a 26% economic stake in that subsidiary alone for 1.16 billion euros, valuing Vantage at roughly 3.8 billion euros. Sit with that number for a second. A quarter stake in 3 franchises is worth close to 4 billion euros. Ubisoft's entire market cap, the whole rest of the company, everything else they've ever made, was worth less than that at the time. Ubisoft isn't going bankrupt tomorrow. The Tencent cash actually did shore up their balance sheets. Non-IFRS net debt dropped from around 885 million euros to under 200 million in a single year. They have a real path to survive, but surviving and being trusted are 2 different things. You can restructure a balance sheet. You can't restructure 16 years of telling customers their purchase doesn't really belong to them, telling employees their contribution doesn't really protect their job, and telling regulators whatever keeps the lights on this quarter. Ubisoft built some of the most influential franchises in gaming history of genuine creative talent. What's just as real is a leadership culture that, when given a choice between the customer and the quarterly number, has picked the number every single time for a decade and a half, and is now watching the customer's trust run out faster than the company can replace it. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, like and comment down below your thoughts on this video. See you in the next one.